please help me welcome Mrs. Terry Beatley.
Thank you. All right, let's see. So we have a lot of information to go over tonight. And what I told Liz and that what we put on the flyer, we're going to be covering the 8 points of propaganda that Dr. Bernard Nathanson and the organization that he set up, NARAL, Pro-Choice America, what they used, an analysis of NARAL's Catholic strategy, how Dr. Nathanson fast-tracked Margaret Sanger's what she called the Negro Project, a very racist population control plan that every American needs to know about. Quotes from his resignation letter, that's a never-seen-before resignation letter from NARAL, and his final exhortation, his plea for that he gave me to deliver across America. And I'm hoping we have time to at least mention what the 6 erroneous assumptions of the Roe v. Wade court, what the mistakes that the judges made, the justices made. But most importantly, more equally important, is to give you action items. You know, because I'm not here to tickle your ears and to fill you with lots of facts and all that. Do we have a job to get done? Yes. We do, like never before, like never before. So I know what state delegate district I'm in tonight. Delegate Trans District. So my question to you is, do you think God had this pre-planned? I do. All right. All right. So regardless of that bio, I humbly stand before you as simply a Catholic woman who the Lord called back to the Catholic Church in 2013 at the altar of Our Lady of the Angels Church in Chicago. I knelt in prayer in this beautiful church. It's one of the oldest, if not the oldest Catholic church, I think that's west of the Mississippi. And with tears streaming down my face because the Lord had spoken unexpectedly and very quietly to me. And he said to me, Terry, you're home. It was home with a capital H. I could like see it. Terry, you're home. And from this place is where we're going to move forward with the promise to Dr. Bernard Nathanson that I made. And I boo-hooed. It was quite an experience. I could see the word home, but it felt like it was beautiful, and it was good, and I never looked back, and I'm so thankful. So any of you sleeping Catholics out there, I'm just one of those returned evangelical Catholics, so happy to have returned home. But like never before, the Catholic Church, we, the people, we have such a big job to get done because just like Father said, we must return America to being a pro-life America. So I come to you as, enthusiastically and to make this information, my goal is to make this information so widely known so that all followers of Christ respond appropriately to the truth. This generally unknown piece of American history that I'll be going over tonight, particularly Catholics, to end abortion in America and ensure that every single unborn life is welcomed and protected by the law. And I believe abortion has seen its better days and that we are on the brink of ending abortion in this country. And I really think as God would have it, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who for the most part, he unleashed abortion onto America, but he also called himself the keeper of the abortion industry keys. So I say it's time to use the keys that he left behind and unlock what's been holding this country captive now for nearly 50 years. So, at times you may hear me go over some information about the Catholic Church. It could be even Catholic leadership or whatever. I don't mean any of this in a demeaning way. It's just fact. It's just history. And much of it is exactly how Dr. Bernard Nathanson said it to me. It's exactly how he wrote it. I'm going to be using a lot of his direct quotes. So I look at this as America ended up embracing abortion, and it was the Catholic Church's failure in leadership that allowed the decriminalization of abortion. And it will be Catholic leadership that will bring our country back to where unborn life is protected and where every parent will have the resources they need to choose life in building a culture of love, life, and family. So we at Hosea Initiative, and some of my team here, our vision, and to me it's like such a tangible kind of vision. We do see an America where the law protects every baby, where every frightened mother in a crisis pregnancy is surrounded by the love and support she needs, that the role of fathers, once again, is cherished and respected, okay? I was down at the Capitol today for about a 1,000-person big pro-life rally, and Delegate Nick Freitas, who's probably going to be running for governor, he just implored the men. He said, men, thank you for being here, and men need to be men. And young men, unless you're ready to be a daddy, don't do daddy things, right? I mean, it was a fantastic quote. I don't know if I got that thing right, but it's like, it was so great to see the men out. Every unwanted baby is provided a loving family through adoption, and every couple longing for children who can't have their own biological children, that they're blessed with an adoptive baby. Because, you know, adoption's a beautiful thing. And more families are intact and thriving with abundant life. So, the question is, how did America, and most particularly Catholic political leaders, evolve from virtually no support at all 100 years ago for any of Margaret Sanger's thinking, her doctrine, her religion, her worldview of promiscuity, eugenics, and birth control? How did we morph into a country in which a Catholic governor in New York proudly declares unfettered abortion over his state in the name of equality and women's reproductive rights, and lighting up the World Trade Center with Planned Parenthood pink? And the apex, mind you, looks so much like the digoxin drug needle that gets injected into a mother's abdomen, her womb, in the second and third trimester, and injecting it into the heart and the body of these babies resting so peacefully in their mother's womb. How did that happen? How did it happen? It's perplexing if you don't know history. Now, I know I'm speaking to a very astute group of people here tonight. And so I'm hoping I can bring you some information, perhaps that you've never heard of before. And for those of you who are brand new to all of this, I hope I don't fire hose you, but so much. I'm hoping nobody falls asleep. And so if anybody sees, so just nudge them, okay? All right, so here the other question is, and then why on January 9th, 2018, so a year ago, right here in Washington, D.C., 21 out of 24 Catholic U.S. senators, that's 87.5% of the U.S. Of the Catholic U.S. senators, voted against the 20-week fetal pain capable bill. 87.5% of the Catholic U.S. senators voted against the 20-week fetal pain capable bill. In fact, Catholic senators Heidi Heitkamp, who, by the way, got defeated in North Dakota, and Senator Chuck Schumer literally high-fived each other on the U.S. Senate floor when that bill got defeated. How? Pardon? The 20-week fetal pain capable bill, which would have said, look, we know without question babies feel pain 20 weeks and beyond. We want to end abortion 20 weeks and beyond. You would think, you know, but the Catholic senators defeated. How did this happen? Then on Monday, just the other day, February 4th, Senator Sass, U.S. Senator Sass, tried to reintroduce the Abortion Survivors Infant Protection Act, which simply means if a baby survives abortion, for God's sake, give the baby health care. And it never even made it to the floor because Catholic U.S. Senator Patty Murray from the state of Washington blocked the bill and the floor vote. I didn't know she was Catholic, but in preparation for this talk, 'cause it's like, oh, I got to bring this thing up to date. You know, who was that defeated it? It's like, oh, this woman named Patty Murray. And I I'm sitting at my desk, I'm like, oh God, is she going to be Catholic? And I looked it up, and she was Catholic. She is Catholic. How did this happen? So why is it that so many Catholics support, whether it be politicians or laity, support the industry of abortion? And why is it that 24% of all abortions are on Catholic women? How did this happen? Well, part of the answer rests in understanding the Catholic strategy, a very stealthy and intentional, deadly plan to undermine, to subvert, to deceive, and then use Catholics to advance abortion onto America and destroy America's historical protection of human life. I will give you the proof tonight of what I just said. Well, I know this to be true because on December 1st, 2009, God made a way for me to fly to New York and go interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Now, here's my guess. 90% of you are going to know who I'm talking about. Raise your hand if you feel like you know the story of Bernard Nathanson. Raise it high so I can see you. Okay, well, actually, it's not as many as I thought. Okay, raise your hand if you've never heard of Bernard Nathanson. I'm just curious. Okay, all right. And how many of you have read at least one book from Bernard Nathanson? Okay, all right. So all you people who said you thought you knew who he was, you don't know because you haven't read one book. I'm just kidding. Okay, all right. So Dr. Bernard Nathanson, he said he unleashed abortion onto America. He became known as America's abortion king. And if you'd been tuned into the pro-abortion movement back in the late 1960s, Dr. Bernard Nathanson was the face of the abortion movement, the medical face of the abortion movement. He co-founded NARAL Pro-Choice America. And there he is in the middle. He co-founded, it was called the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Law. They were based up in New York. And what they were trying to do was unite a very fractured pro-abortion movement of the 1960s. Lots of groups, and they all were standing on different platforms. And they saw an opportunity that if they could create the first pro-abortion political action organization, and today it's called NARAL Pro-Choice America. Raise your hand if you ever heard of that one. Okay? Because what surprises me is I go across the country, everybody's heard of Planned Parenthood. But you'd be amazed how many people have never heard of NARAL, NARAL, Pro-Choice America, even though it was the first pro-abortion political action organization. Okay, Dr. Bernard Nathanson trained Planned Parenthood doctors on how to slaughter babies in the mother's wombs. Planned Parenthood was not doing abortions. Dr. Nathanson in 1970, when the New York State Legislature was considering overturning a 140-year-old law in New York that had protected babies in the womb. A bill had been patroned, and they were trying to flip that law, which they ended up doing. Nathanson, in an attempt to convince Planned Parenthood to join with NARAL in the pro-abortion movement, he went to their board of directors, and he begged them to join with NARAL. And he said, the Planned Parenthood board of directors sat there stoically. He said they looked like poker players. And he said he did everything but pull his shoe off and bang it on the table like a good Marxist. Which, by the way, he described his organization later on as a very Stalinist organization because truth does not matter if you're a good Marxist. Okay, so he admits to, so Planned Parenthood, by the way, they refused to help NARAL get abortion legalized in New York. Then when abortion was legalized in April of 1970, Dr. Nathanson was the only one, for the most part, in that circle of people who guessed how many women would descend upon the Capitol, or descend upon the state to have legalized abortions. He said it's going to be 250,000. He said the hospitals are not going to be able to maintain this number of people because ideally they wanted women to go into the hospitals and not these freestanding centers that basically had been underground. So, because mind you, as late as 1965, Planned Parenthood in their world population leaflet, they warned women not to have abortions. Why? Because abortion kills the life of a human being, and it may make you sterile, so you can't have a baby when you want one. That's Planned Parenthood in 1965. So what happened there? 1965, abortion's not women's health care, it's murder. 1970, they're like, whoa, look at all these women coming into New York. 1970, 1971, guess who they call? Dr. Bernard Nathanson. And so Nathanson trained Planned Parenthood all through 1971 and 72. He trained them how to slaughter babies, and he trained them how to run abortion mills. They took copious notes for 2 years, and then he watched Planned Parenthood morph into what it is today, globally. He paved the way for Roe v. Wade by feeding it the propaganda campaign. He personally was responsible for 75,000 abortions. He personally aborted 5,000 babies. He taught doctors on another 10,000 children. When he ran the largest abortion mill in the world, another 60,000 babies lost their lives under his management. And he personally aborted his own child. So he knows a thing or two about abortion, much more than all those delegates and senators and the governor of Virginia. He was known as America's abortion king. He called himself the keeper of the abortion industry keys. And that's why I say, if he's the keeper of the keys, let's use them. So I believe his legacy will lead millions of people who have been hurt, crushed by being affected by abortion in some form or fashion. It's going to lead these people to Jesus Christ and into his church for healing. And what we're about to build is the biggest pro-life army the world has ever seen. And it's going to be beautiful because we're going to crush this. Dr. Nathanson is a modern-day Saul to Paul story, because Dr. Nathanson not only became pro-life, he began his pro-life journey 5 to 6 months or so, 4 to 6 months after celebrating Roe v. Wade. He celebrated. They were so happy. He was on the media, TV, radio, everywhere, newspapers. And then he was exhausted. At the end of 1972, right before Roe v. Wade, he became the chief of obstetrics at St. Luke's Hospital in New York City. And the hospital rolled in about 6 months later a brand new technology called real-time ultrasound. And the father of America's industry of abortion sees that little baby girl yawning, sucking her thumb, wiggling her toes, stretching. And he's like, I got a problem here. He knew he had a moral, ethical problem on his hands. And he went back to NARAL for the next 2 years saying, look, this real-time ultrasound is revealing everything. And we've got major issues here. So before I read you his resignation letter, so I fly up to New York on December 1st, 2009. I spend an hour, and be careful what you ask for. I had been at a prayer vigil in November of 2009, begging God to show me what he wanted me to do with all the research I had done and the experiences I had had in going into the black church in Virginia, meeting black ministers, Protestant ministers, and sharing that Ma'afa 21 film that explains the history of black genocide via Planned Parenthood. And the response of the people was overwhelming. They hugged me and kissed me, and they told me to never stop doing what you're doing. So it's like, how do you stop? But what do you do? So I'm at this prayer vigil in November begging God to tell me, what am I supposed to do? And all I can hear, and I say hear in quote marks, it's not like it's audible, but in my prayer, all I can hear is, go interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson. And I sit there at this prayer vigil, and I'm like, God, why would Dr. Nathanson say yes to my request? I'm a little homeschool mom from Virginia. And all I know is it must be because I have tenacity, because I've learned all my weaknesses. That's the only thing I got going for me is tenacity. So I think that's why he anointed me with that. So they can attest to this. They can list all my failures, right? So, but anyway, so I call up there. Mrs. Nathanson answers the phone, and she said, Terry, my husband's 83, and he's terminally ill. He has not granted an interview in well over a year. Put your request in writing, fax it up here, and I will give it to him, and let's just see what he says. She calls me, so I fax it up there, and she calls me back a couple days later, and she said, Terry, to my surprise, he said yes. Can you fly up here on December 1st, 2009? So you know what that means? I am old, because that's 10 years ago in December. But when you're about ready to teach a nation what the father of the abortion industry did, God has to get everything lined up. Everything lined up. And he's doing just that. So Dr. Nathanson, 2 years to the day of Roe v. Wade, on January 22nd, 1975, he resigns from NARAL. The father of America's industry of abortion resigns from the organization that he set up. Mind you, that organization has their state representative, and she's down at that Virginia General Assembly every single day during the session. So while we're up here doing whatever and playing soccer and what have you, they're working really hard. Right before I went to the publication, Dr. Nathanson's wife said, Terry, I think I have something that you might want. And I said, what's that? She said, well, I've been going through his papers because he died 1 year and 2 months after I met him. And she said, I found his resignation letter from NARAL. Do you think you'd want to see it? I'm like, nah. Well, I don't have time to read the whole thing. But the name of the book, What If We've Been Wrong, comes from Dr. Nathanson's resignation letter. I didn't tell you the best part. I'm going to tell you now just in case I don't forget it. So first he was an atheist or agnostic. You can debate that back and forth. Then the science made him pro-life. And then years of contemplating suicide. He crossed paths with a priest who gave him 5 years of lots of spiritual guidance. And Dr. Bernard Nathanson was received into the Catholic Church on December 8, 1996, on the feast day of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Woohoo! So that's why I say he's the modern day Saul to Paul. Okay? All right, so here's the end of his resignation letter to NARAL, and it says, the judgments of the Supreme Court were never meant to be infallible or eternal. And what if we've been wrong? What if we've been wrong? If the courts should soon reverse itself on the abortion issue in the light of changing times and or new scientific evidence, what an incalculable injustice will have been perpetrated. What an immeasurable, irretrievable loss will have been suffered. The annual dues to NARAL are $10 a year. And the hubris, the arrogance of certainty. I can no longer afford those dues. Sincerely, Bernard N. Nathanson. Isn't that awesome? And America doesn't know his story. But we're just about getting ready to learn it, not just here, but nationwide. So at the end of that interview, I said, Dr. Nathanson, if you have a message for America, tell me what it is, and I promise you I'll deliver it across our country until it becomes common knowledge or until Roe v. Wade's overturned. And that's when he said, yes. He said, continue teaching the strategy. It's an 8-point strategy of how I deceived America, and then tell America to love one another. Abortion's not love. Stop the killing. The world needs more love, and I'm all about love now. Isn't that so beautiful? And I shook his hand, and I said, I promise you I'm going to get this done. Okay, so, question. How did the collective possession, okay, this possession happen? Because when I look and listen to Catholic Governor Cuomo, and I watched those videos again and again, I wanted to see what I could pick up each time. All I can hear and see are 46 years of propaganda that Nathanson's given us the keys to. The Catholic strategy in full force, the spirit of Jezebel raging against God and his commandments, and this hubris of certainty. And what I also see, though, is the end of abortion in America. It's right on the horizon. We're so, I believe, we're so close, relatively speaking. So how did this collective possession happen? As you probably know, that's like the image of Moloch, you know, where the god of human sacrifice, where the people would give their babies and they would be burned. Well, according to Father Raymond de Souza, who writes frequently, among other things, but he writes for the Wanderer paper. I don't know if you get that paper, but Andrea turned me on that. So I love the Wanderer paper. Well, in the nick of time, I saw this article, and I thought, this perfectly lays up what's happened to America. So this is Father Raymond D'Souza. Just as an individual person can be possessed, it's possible for a society to be possessed in an analogous sort of way. Demonic possession is of the body, not of the soul per se, so we can speak in an analogous way of possession of the body politic of a society. The member and organs of the body politic can be under the domination of the possessing demon, and he can commandeer or overpower the spiritual faculties of the soul, like the mind and the will, in the infested, possessed state. In societies and as in persons, there always remains that basic human endowment of inner freedom, which assures us that the person or society is never without its capacity to choose the right path. That's very reassuring. So an example of social possession can be seen in the book of Maccabees. The Maccabees were trying to expel a demonic possession that had taken over the land of Israel. The story describes every level of demonic activity, from temptation to oppression to infestation to oppression to infestation to possession, and then ultimately demonic control. So, is it possible that America has been dealing with demonic possession that's taken control over much of our country, so that some of our leaders support abortion on the delivery table and infanticide? What do you think? Is it possible? I say absolutely yes. And what does this have to do with NARAL's founders who plotted the destruction of America's historical protection of unborn life? Because NARAL knew they had to undermine and subvert the Catholic Church, the only remaining bulwark, rampart in America, in order to fully take possession and unleash the demonic control. So tonight, I'm going to try to construct like a high-rise apartment in an analogous sort of way, okay? But you came tonight for the view out of the penthouse. That's the Catholic strategy. But all those floors leading up to the penthouse view of the Catholic strategy, this didn't happen overnight. This is built on decades and decades. So going back to Father D'Souza's, the explanation of demonic control, that whole takeover, I'm actually building a seminar on Margaret Sanger, taking decade by decade of Planned Parenthood and using that layup and how she infected America. So, what we do know is that the spirit of Jezebel and Moloch, it's like stepping into Margaret Sanger's shoes, her legacy, along with a cadre of other moral thugs who are all part of the different stories inside that high-rise. What we do know is that biblical principle that a bad seed always replicates its own kind and brings forth a very bitter harvest. And bitter indeed, we're reaping the rotten fruit. It's a 100-year curse of Margaret Sanger. But what's getting ready to happen is, right before I went to publication, God put on my heart so clearly, that there needed to be a Bernard N. Nathanson MD Life Award. That happened, they were very clear in 2016. And then it struck me that was exactly 100 years since Margaret Sanger began her dirty deeds on America. And I'll go ahead and let you know, because it's already been a public press release. We're just waiting for the right time. But we really felt strongly that Donald Trump would be a very pro-life president and live up to what he was saying. Has he almost exceeded our expectations? Absolutely. So even before he won, my board of directors voted that Donald Trump, whether he won or lost, would win that award. And so we're waiting for the right time. We're hoping it's on December 8th, 2019, which will be the anniversary of Dr. Nathanson's baptism, okay? So, and why is that so key? Because it's literally laying a mark in American history that we're ending, it's over, Margaret Sanger's curse. Do we have to appropriate the victory? Absolutely. But that 100-year curse, it's over. Bernard Nathanson's showing up on the scene. Now, all we have to do now is go and appropriate the victory. So just putting things in the culture in context as we move forward so I can explain the Catholic strategy in depth. None of it makes sense if you're not looking at the culture in context. So we know by the time NARAL formed up in New York, 1968-69, Margaret Sanger had been around for decades, as well as Dr. Alfred Kinsey. And you put the two of them together, and it's a contagion that swept America like a horrible tsunami. You know, they turned sex into recreational fun and so much more damage. Margaret Sanger, she institutionalized government-funded promiscuity, eugenics, and birth control to eliminate who she considered to be human weeds, as you know, to move more and more women into the workplace and to keep them there, and to advance her worldview of socialism and the destruction of God-ordained family. Now, make no mistake, okay, about Sanger. When she wrote the Woman Rebel pamphlet back in the early 1900s, this is what she said in the very first booklet. She writes, "Birth control appeals to the advanced radical because it is calculated to undermine the authority of the Christian churches. I look forward to seeing humanity free one day of the tyranny of Christianity, no less than capitalism." Margaret Sanger. We have spent, if my numbers are correct, our tax money has funded her religion. Planned Parenthood is a religion. It's a worldview to the tune of $10 billion. And she passed her torch to Lawrence Lader. Now, Lawrence Lader, as far as the other part of the culture and context, right about the time that NARAL was forming, we had Humana Vitae with St. Paul VI. And everybody in here probably knows about that. I don't need to get into it. And all the four warnings of Humana Vitae, which have fully manifested, right? So that's the culture and context. And then one other thing is the decline in maternity deaths. And I think this is very, very important. In 1930, about 700 women would die per 100,000 live births, okay? But by 1945, that had been cut in half. And so by the time NARAL comes around, maternal deaths is like non-existent, like 30, per 100,000. So when you hear people, particularly candidates, say, well, we need this to protect, maternal health and all this abortion, that's a lie, because it was over, okay? All right, then we have the formation of NARAL. So the man on the left is Lawrence Lader. Okay, he worked for the first card-carrying communist in the House of Representatives. Radical ideas were nothing new for Lawrence Lader. The middle person, of course, is Betty Friedan. She founded the National Organization of Women. All research really indicates that they're full-blown communists. And then Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was not a communist, but he was an atheist or agnostic, and he just thought he was doing the right thing for women. Okay. Dr. Nathanson says that they developed these 8 odious tactics. And these odious tactics he reflected on in one of his books. And this is how the last paragraph is, and I think it's so powerful. He says, "I believe that the abortion ethic is fatally and forever flawed by the immorality of the means of its victory. A political victory achieved, a political victory achieved by such odious tactics is at best an unstable tyranny spawned by an unscrupulous and unprincipled minority. At the least, those of us who are uneasy with permissive abortion should re-examine the issue. I believe that an America which allows a junta of moral thugs to foist an evil of incalculable dimensions upon this country and then just permit that evil to flower, creates for itself a deadly legacy, a millennium of shame. But we're here tonight to end that millennium of shame, because my people perish for lack of knowledge. But with the knowledge, we will crush that abortion industry. So the eight-point strategy is this. And I'm going to go through these points really quickly, except the Catholic strategy one. First, NARAL, this is 1968-69. They hired a PR firm up in New York, $7,500 to help develop this campaign. First, they framed the debate around choice. It's just a choice. And then second, they created the cynical slogans, my body, my choice. Every baby a wanted baby, all those slogans that you hear today, so many were literally written up, designed by NARAL. And then they use fabricated facts. And this is a really important thing to know. So what would Nathanson say? If you were the media, what would Nathanson be lying to you? What would he say? He would say, look, 1 million women a year are having back alley abortions, these coat hanger abortions with bad abortionists and all this. 5,000 to 10,000 women a year are dying. We have an epidemic on our hand. Well, guess what the real numbers were? There were not 1 million illegal abortions. That's a lie. A big, bold lie, but a lie. The real number was about 99,000 illegal abortions. 99,000 too many. And there were not 5,000 to 10,000 women dying. The real number was about 200. But they would tell the media the high numbers, and the media would buy it, okay? Then they would use fake polling. Dr. Nathanson would say 60% of Americans want abortion on demand legalized. Do you know what the real number was? 0.5% of Americans wanted abortion legalized. But he would tell you, the media, 60%, because the PR firm said, look, if you're going to create a revolution, you have to be over 50%. And who would have thought the lies were so audacious? But if you don't believe in God, lying to many of those people is okay. And it was fine and dandy to NARAL pro-choice America. Okay, then they would manipulate the complicit media. He could tell you anything, and you would write it down and run back to the newspapers and TV and radio and report it like it's the truth. And then he would justify it. He would say, look, the women who are going to have illegal abortions, they're going to do it anyway. Just make it legal. And but of course we know that by justifying it and rationalizing it, once it became legal, immediately it was 1 million abortions a year, right? So it went from 99,000, so it was a self-fulfilling lie. He repeated the lies, and we all know that if you repeat the lies long enough in the media, it becomes the truth. But what does President Trump call that stuff? Fake news. Fake news is true. All right, we have the facts here. Okay. And then lastly is the Catholic strategy. So the penthouse view, and after I finish the Catholic strategy, then we're going to fill in the floors just ever so briefly. So in 1970, they flipped the New York anti-abortion law that had been on the books for 140 years. They flipped that law in 18 months with propaganda, and it allowed abortion. It was a very aggressive bill until Governor Cuomo. But it allowed abortion up through 24 weeks, okay? And then, in January 9th, 1971, NARAL holds an executive committee meeting, an emergency meeting. It's called by Lawrence Lader. Lawrence Lader is so worried about something, a most serious threat to abortion advocacy. And do you know what that threat was? It was the increasing number of live-born babies who were surviving second and third trimester saline abortions. Lawrence Lader considered these babies an embarrassment. An embarrassment. And he was afraid that the press was making too much of these survivors of abortion. And he was afraid that the opposition elements would seize upon them as a tactic in the abortion wars. And a free book to the person who can shout out the quickest, a free fact-check booklet, okay, that teaches you the 8-point strategy. If you can shout it out, you can figure out who says it first. Who or what was the biggest opposition element that they were afraid of? I heard this lady right here in the vest, okay. The Catholic Church, that's right. It was not pro-life legislators. But why would they fear the Catholic Church so much in 1970, 1971? Why? Well, for 1,900 years, basically, The Catholic Church had identified abortion as intrinsically evil and morally indefensible. The church fathers wrote against it, the Word of God warned against it, and they acted pro-life. They rescued those women. They rescued those babies who had been put on the other side of the Roman walls or what have you from infanticide. So what happened then to the Catholic Church? Where we have morphed so much into how I opened tonight. Well, the easy answer, I could say this and walk out the door. It's competing worldviews mixed with relentless, stealthy propaganda, with political dexterity, ignorance, apathy, fear, pride, complacency, timidity, and lack of vision for crushing the abortion industry. And of course, you gotta follow the money trail, right? You gotta follow the money trail. Woo! All right, so I've just described how they feared the Catholic Church in the 1970s. Feared. It was a force to reckon with. So what are they going to do? What are they going to do about this? Well, this slide here, when I give like a radio interview and I don't have time to go into the depth that I'm going to give you right now, I will simply explain it like this. They would blame the Pope, the priests, cardinals. Anytime a woman died of an illegal abortion any place across America, it was the Catholic Church's fault. And then they would emphasize anytime a Catholic politician or candidate was running for office and they were softening if they were already in office and they were softening their position on abortion, NARAL would emphasize that Catholic politician in the media. And you would, if you're a busy, mom of, 18 and a half children, you don't have time to research this, so you're just like, wow, the Catholics are really changing, okay? And then they would support. So anytime a Catholic politician would run for re-election or run for election, if you're gonna be pro-abortion, they would support you, door knocking, pamphleteering, radio ads, or what have you, whatever they did back in the 1970s. And then they applied the Catholic straddle. You already know what the straddle is. It's been around so long, but what you might not know was that the public relations firm worked with them because what did New York have? New York had lots of Catholics and lots of Catholic voters. And NARAL was after a political victory. They had to change the law. But laws can always be flipped back, right? Okay? They needed to make sure they could get enough Catholics to vote for pro-abortion candidates. Catholics had never really had to contend with this issue in the voting booth, all right? But they did now with NARAL. So the straddle is simply this. So they already had about 50% of Catholics because they were already contracepting. And it was not a hard push down the slide to get them to support abortion because if they were already contracepting. It's just a fact. But what are they going to do with that other 50%? So they would simply say this, look, Mr. and Mrs. Catholic, we know you're personally against abortion. We know you are. And we're not trying to convince you that, you've got to change. You're personally against it. But look, it's a medical decision between a woman and her doctor. And every woman deserves the right to choose to make up her own mind. They literally called it the Catholic straddle. They got enough Catholics to straddle the fence. And I witnessed it. I went down to Farmville, Virginia when Tim Kaine was running against, Mike Pence. And that abortion issue came up. And Tim Kaine executed the Catholic straddle. And it was all I could do was to stay in my chair. I wanted to stand up and say he's lying. That, my friends, is the Catholic straddle. So, all right, now we're going to go deep into the Catholic strategy so you can better appreciate how they looked at the Catholic Church as its biggest enemy and how they turned it into a religious war and how vitriolic their thoughts were about the Catholic Church, and it's really sad. So in a public statement issued from the National Symposium on Legislative Breakthroughs, this is a NARAL document, on May 12, 1972, it accused President Nixon of injecting himself into the abortion wars. It accused a fanatical minority, that's us, of one religious faith suddenly determined to impose its dogma on the majority, promoting a religious war, flouting its tax exemption, attempting to repeal the Bill of Rights. That's what they're charging against the Catholic Church, that the Catholic Church was trying to repeal the Bill of Rights. And we, NARAL, we must keep Cardinal Cook out of our bedrooms and quit intimidating legislators. They accuse the Catholic Church endlessly screaming murderer, even at clergymen and legislators, and accuse the Catholic Church of harnessing its vast finances, even sheltering the national right to life in its tax-free chancery offices in New York, and this drive to overcome the most humanitarian legislation of our time, abortion. So why the Catholic ruthless power? Lawrence Lader would ask. Well, one conclusion to be made, said Lader, is that the Catholic hierarchy is determined to bend the country to its will over abortion. Lader predicted, and this is the only thing I ever agree with Lawrence Lader on, Lawrence Lader predicted that what happens to all human rights in the next few years depends on what happens to abortion. Bingo. NARAL learned a terrible lesson. The Catholic drive is unrelenting, and this is the only beginning, Lawrence Lader said. NARAL must start next week to match the most powerful lobby in the nation with equal force and similar tactics, dollar for dollar. If you analyze the document from 1972, it's full of fury, full of blame, and literally, if you substitute the word Catholic with Jewish or black, it would be the most anti-Semitic or racist document you've ever read. But it was Catholic. So even Lader did not write about the Catholic strategy in his book called Abortion, Making the Revolution. He doesn't tell you about the Catholic strategy. But Dr. Bernard Nathanson does, because by the time he writes about it, he was already pro-life. So he's letting he's divulging the whole thing. So what's implied, any state legislator who voted against abortion law repeal in New York was spineless. That was the insinuation, knuckling under some massive conspiracy having its roots in Rome and its agents scattered all across the nation. And that a legislator might be voting his own conscience, well, they didn't really take that into consideration. Okay, so the statement entirely is compatible with NARAL's Catholic strategy. The Catholic strategy depended on the exploitation of three things. Three things back in the 60s. The campaign and election of John F. Kennedy, okay, some of you in here will remember that, in conjunction with Vatican II Council called by Pope John the 23rd. And then third, the Vietnam War, resistance. So those three things, these were very, very important things to make the Catholic strategy work. First, John F. Kennedy was, the first practicing Catholic president, and he portrayed himself as what? A cool Catholic, unencumbered by the fetters of Catholicism, by emphasizing the distance between him and his faith and his public duties. That was John F. Kennedy. He was a cool Catholic. His faith's not going to touch him, bother him, morph him, change him, give him anything to stand on. And by thoroughly publicizing his pledge to respect that difference. That's JFK. JFK became the model, and the NARAL needed this model. He became the model of the modern, enlightened 20th century Catholic, thinking for himself without obedience to the church dogma. And NARAL, watch this, they totally pick up on this. Versus old-style anti-Catholicism, which had drawn on immigrant fear class snobbery, and a budding Protestant distrust of the ethnic, that is, Catholic invasion of America in the 19th century. But Kennedy-style Catholicism made the sort of mindless, all-encompassing bias unfashionable. So, with increasing numbers of young Catholics entering colleges, joining professions, enlisting in the rank of liberal causes like feminism, civil rights, and what have you, Vietnam War resistance, NARAL perceived that there were two classes of Catholics. The educated Kennedy cool Catholic, okay, the fashionable ones, and those who were still blue collar, only one generation removed from immigration, and uncritically subject to the dictates of the church. Quote from Dr. Nathanson, NARAL's strategy was to use the modern Catholics to persuade the others to our cause. This is left in writing by Bernard Nathanson. It almost makes me nauseated as I tell you this. So keep in mind, the modern Kennedy Catholics needed little persuasion from NARAL, okay? They were already contracepting. Thank you, Margaret Sanger, for the last 50 years. It was not a long step to the public position of pro-choice, and to maintain their appearance as enlightened and progressive while still retaining their bona fides as Catholics, NARAL provided them with the now classic straddle, as I just explained a few minutes ago. Okay? And using Nathanson's own words, abortion is personally abhorrent, but everyone must be free to make their own choice. Quote, now NARAL was ready to use them to call over the more traditional, less trendy Catholics to our cause. Isn't this sad? But we're going to change it, because every Catholic across America is going to learn the history. Because if they stand on pro-abortion or pro-choice, I teach history. And it's important to know history, so at least you know the foundation that you're standing on, because it's a foundation of sand, is it not? Total sand, but there's a big wave coming. All right, so in Nathanson's words, Pope John the 23rd called Vatican II to modernize the church, to bring it into the 20th century. In a sense, his efforts synergize quite nicely with what Kennedy had already done for us. And although Pope John the 23rd was adamantly against abortion, his generally liberal thinking polarized Catholics in the United States along the same lines that Kennedy had, creating a liberal and a conservative Catholic constituency. Nathanson, quote, the stage was set for the portrayal of the Catholic Church as a political force, for the use of anti-Catholicism as a political instrument, and for the manipulation of Catholics themselves by splitting them and setting them against each other. Let it be said, said Dr. Nathanson, the church helped in NARAL. The papal encyclical Humana Vitae of 1968, denying both contraception and abortion, it was a bonanza for NARAL at precisely the correct moment in history. Quote from Nathanson, by linking the abortion and contraception issue in the encyclical, the Vatican made it impossible for those Catholics who were already using birth control to split off the abortion issue, therefore leaving them to pick their own way through the confusing ethical and theological landscape. So many of them ended up in our camp. Many of those Catholics ended up in NARAL's camp, and we used them to great effect. And going on 61 million American babies have lost their lives due to the Catholic strategy. I held this poster up for an hour and a half. I'm going to hold it up high in case nobody can see it. At the bottom, whoop. Margaret Sanger started the Negro Project in 1939. And today it's killed 20 million black American babies. Catholics, awaken. Awaken. So, NARAL continued to bash the Catholic Church with anti-Catholic rhetoric. Many reporters were young Catholics, and they were so tired of opposing the Vietnam War, it actually felt really good for them to support something. So they were supporting the pro-abortion movement. But here's something else really interesting. They were not about to expose the anti-Catholic rhetoric and the accusations of prejudice. Prejudice was something evil, directed at Jews or blacks, but not Catholics. So even the Catholic young reporters, they just went along with it. So not only did NARAL loathe or revile the Catholic Church as the demonic opposition to NARAL's crusade, but on the infrequent occasion when the church did summon up the courage to respond to our most intemperate attacks, we would accuse them of polarizing the country along religious lines. So they were doing it, but then the NARAL would accuse the church of doing it. So here was NARAL churning out pamphlets, circulars, white papers, and media handouts, excoriating the church and accusing it of turning the abortion issue into a religious war. And meanwhile, we were guilty of precisely that, except on the side of the liberal angle. Now, but what about the effect on priests? God bless our priests. God bless our holy priests. Can you imagine being a priest back then, as if now it's not hard enough? But I mean, imagine a priest, back then, you got all this, the radical feminism, you got all these. Well, it was, Humana Vitae, I think, was so poorly taught. I don't know, I think he wrote it and then it was stuck under a shelf somewhere, because it's it wasn't talked about, okay? And made them very reluctant or reticent to talk about these issues. So it's kind of like stepping into a field with a zillion landmines in it, okay? So I can only guess this made them feel stripped of moral authority to opine, and it must have been very degrading and undermining. But God bless our priests who are well-schooled, well-read in the Humana Vitae and the effects of contraception and all that, because we need those priests to stand boldly. And I love meeting the young ones who are so well taught, and they're like, we're ready for the fight. And so what I say is Hosea Initiative is here, and we will help you. We will teach this piece of American history. Dr. Nathanson, he ends it by saying, the Catholic strategy, everything I just exposed to you, quote, it had no modern parallel. Nobody had ever done this before to the Catholic Church. So pray for Mother Church. Now, that's the Catholic strategy, and there we go. So how did this collective possession happen? Well, we're going to be filling in some of the floors as I promised, okay? And then we'll have enough time for questions and all. So NARAL continues. So now they've divided the church very, very effectively. And the beat goes on. So you just know, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the church becomes more split, more split, more split. And for whatever the demons are, or whatever's in the water when these guys go to Washington, D.C., now we see what happens to Catholic U.S. senators and what they vote against or what they vote for. Okay, so let's fill in the different floors, okay? Nudge that person beside you. Make sure everybody's still awake? Okay, all right. Okay, now let's go back. So I remember I said, I'm going to show you the view from the penthouse. That's NARAL, 1960s, 1970s, but I didn't start there, okay? We had, by the time 1973, Roe v. Wade, we had already had 57 years of propaganda from the queen of contraception, Margaret Sanger. She was an anarchist, a socialist, a Marxist, and today we live in a world seeped in her worldview. And what is her worldview, really, when you boil it down? It's sexual hedonism. She lived it, she breathed it, she advised it, she wrote about it, she practiced it. That's Margaret Sanger for the life of me. We've given Her organization, $10 billion. Wake up, America, wake up, right? We had 40 years since the 1930 Lambeth Conference in the Anglican Church over in England. And as many of you probably know, that's when the Anglican Church broke. I mean, for like 400 or 500 years, whenever it was, Protestantism, Catholic Church, Catholic, Protestant, nobody had allowed contraception. We were lock, stock, and barrel, Protestants with us, right? Until the Lambeth Conference, which they began to allow some married couples to use contraception. And woo, quick slope down the slide. I have this book called, I think it's a thin little book, but The Love of Life, I think that's what it's called. And it walks you through how the different Protestant denominations began to embrace contraception and then began to embrace abortion. And it's quite an interesting read because it goes decade by decade until you finally get to a point where it's like, I'm not a stupid person, but what did they just say about contraception? You read, and abortion. It makes no sense because it's all spliced and diced to try to sound warm and fuzzy. It's a fascinating read, okay? Just something to be aware of. Okay, by 1973, we had had 40 years at least of the communist infiltration within the Catholic Church, as testified by Bella Dodd. Raise your hand if you know about Bella Dodd. Okay, y'all look around. No, seriously, keep your hand high. Y'all look around. That's how few people know the history of Bella Dodd. Just Google her name. Anybody ever heard of Archbishop Fulton Sheen? Yes. Yeah, guess what? He brought Bella Dodd into the Catholic Church. 1952, I think it was, 1952, under the guidance of Bishop Fulton Sheen. But strap yourselves in, because if you're a good communist, which means you're a Marxist, which means you don't believe in God, and you set out to destroy America. You have to destroy it morally and all sorts of different ways. Bella Dodd worked for the Communist Party in the 1930s, 1940s. She reported to somebody over in Russia. Quote from Bella Dodd: more than 1,100 men had been put into the priesthood to destroy the church from within. She did it. That was her job, to get these men placed. The idea here was that these men would be ordained into the priesthood and progress to positions of influence and authority as monsignors and bishops. It's exactly what happened. Bella Dodd stated that right now they're in the highest places in the church, where they were working to weaken the church's effectiveness against communism. And let's face it, communist countries love abortion. Right? Think about China, okay? Think about, Russia. The average woman in Russia has had, like 7 to 10 abortions or so. So these changes, Bella Dodd declared, would be so drastic that you will not recognize the Catholic Church. And a few years later, in a conversation with Alice von Hildebrand, everybody here knows her, Alice von Hildebrand, Bella told her that there are 4 cardinals within the Vatican who are working for the communists. That was 12 years before Vatican II. Pray, my friends, pray, because we don't want Mother Church to have any more invasion, okay? I don't like giving this piece of history, but if we're going to end abortion, every Catholic across America needs to know this part of history because it's one of the floors in that skyrise. We had 25 years, since 1948, of the propaganda of the king of sexual deviancy. That's Dr. Alfred Kinsey. He shifted our laws, his pseudoscience shifted our laws from Bible-based law to his pseudoscience-based law because he believed that children are sexual from birth. What a lie. But he wanted to perpetuate that lie So he did some horrible things, and this is not an Alfred Kinsey seminar. We give those, but that's where I'm just going to end it right there. But he set out to normalize homosexuality, promiscuity, pornography, abortion, divorce, and any kind of sexual deviancy. Alfred Kinsey. And guess what? The organizations that spun off from his education, called SECUS, the Sexual Education Institute of the U.S., guess where they teach? In our public high schools. Time to flush out the corruption. All right, then we had 7 years of the Kennedy conversion. In my book, I think it's chapter 14, it's called The Few Perfidious Priests and the Catholic Strategy. And it opens with a quote from Patrick Madrid. But basically it says this, that back in 1965 or 66, there was the intentional, systematic, concerted effort on the part of a group of dissenting Catholics. Guess what? They were the communists, as far as I'm concerned, who employed bogus moral theology arguments to convince the Kennedys that they could accept and promote abortion with a clear conscience. That's how it happened. If you wonder, it's like, why did the Kennedys lead this? They were steered off course by rogue priests, but I've already told you about Belladad. So these were not priests like the priests here at this church, or probably maybe any of the priests that you know. These were probably the communists to take down America. Have they done a good job? Yep, but it's going to come to an end. All right, then we had 4 years, so by the time we got Roe v. Wade, 1973, we had 4 years of the National Organization of Women. Remember, Betty Friedan was one of the founders, remember? Okay. It's a little bit lengthy, but it is so worth the read, okay? A good friend of mine now is Mallory Millett. She's the sister to, Mallory Millett is the sister to Kate Millett. Kate Millett is one of the communists who started the National Organization of Women. Everybody's heard about that, right? Now, NOW. Okay, just for kicks to lighten this up a little bit. When I went away to college, my first year, I came home, I guess it was Thanksgiving, I'm like, Dad, I just heard about this organization on campus. It's called the National Organization of Women. I'm thinking about joining. And you know what my dad said? He said, sit down. I did not join the National Organization of Women. Woo, I'll never forget that. You know, my dad, we butted heads on a lot of things, but God bless that man, rest his soul, he was absolutely right. So I stand before you today reading what maybe my dad had already read, okay? Okay, this is a description from Mallory Millett. She's Catholic. Her sister Kate, the communist, died, I think, like a year and a half ago. They had grown up Catholic. They had gone to Catholic schools, Catholic universities. When they told the nuns, actually no, not Catholic universities, but when they told the nuns which universities they were going to, the nuns just shook their head and they said, oh my gosh, when you come out, you're not going to believe in God and you're going to be a communist. And they both came out just like that. Kate, more than Mallory. Okay, so Mallory gets married. This is my friend Mallory, the Catholic now. And she goes to Asia, ends up in a divorce, comes back to the United States. It's 1969. She doesn't know where to live, so she calls her sister, and her sister says, hey, come to New York. Kate invited me to join her for a gathering at the home of her friend Lila Karp. They called the assemblage a consciousness-raising group, a typical communist exercise, something practiced in Maoist China. We gathered at a large table as the chairperson opened the meeting with a back-and-forth recitation, like a litany, a type of prayer done in Catholic Church. But now it was Marxism, the church of the left, mimicking religious practice. So you ready? This is what my friend Mallory was witnessing, okay? Why are we here today, she asked, she being the leader of this group. Why are we here today, she asked. To make revolution, they answered. What kind of revolution, she replied. The cultural revolution, they chanted. And how do we make the cultural revolution, she demanded. By destroying the American family, they answered. And how do we destroy the family? She came back. By destroying the American patriarch, they cried exuberantly. And how do we destroy the American patriarch, she replied? By taking away his power. And how do we do that? By destroying monogamy, they shouted. And how can we destroy monogamy, she asked. Well, their answer left me dumbstruck, breathless, disbelieving my ears. Was I on planet Earth? Who were these people? Quote, by promoting promiscuity, eroticism, abortion, prostitution, and homosexuality, they resounded. 1969. They proceeded with a long discussion on how to advance these goals by establishing the National Organization of Women. It was clear they desired nothing less than the utter deconstruction of Western society. The upshot was that the only way to do this was to invade every American institution. Everyone must be permeated with the revolution. The media, the education system, the universities, the high schools, K through 12, school boards, and then the judiciary, the legislatures, the executive branches, and even the public library system. It fell on my ears as a ludicrous scheme, as if a band of highly imaginative children were planning a Brinks robbery. Right? To me, this sounded silly. I was enduring culture shock after having been cut off from my homeland, living in the third world countries for years with not one trip back to the United States. I was one of those people who, upon returning to America, she fell to the ground and kissed the soil, only to go up to Greenwich Village and be exposed to this. Okay, so that's Mallory Millett. You can actually find that if you Google how Marxists ruined lives, something like that, Mallory Millett. So, my friends, this is, so that's National Organization of Women, and then what do we have next? Is 1969, 68, 69, NARAL shows up. Dr. Bernard Nathanson is invited by Lawrence Slater, the communist, to go over to his apartment condo in New York and have a nice dinner. And just like those remember those undercover Planned Parenthood videos, where they're sipping their glasses of wine as they're talking about selling baby body parts, right? Well, Lawrence Slater and Bernard Nathanson sit together at the table, sipping their wine or their cocktails. And Lawrence Slater declares, abortion needs to be legal in all 50 states. Will you join me? And Dr. Bernard Nathanson effectively says yes. And that, my friends, is part. There are other things. There are other ways we could fill up all these different floors in that skyrise. But I've just given you about a 180-degree view out of the penthouse with some substantial concrete and steel, what do you call that, structure for all the different floors. And now it's time to go return America. And so, lastly with this slide, so how did this collective possession happen? And you can see it starts out small. Sometimes it starts out as an idea, right? Okay, so as far as action goes, I want to leave you with a few ideas. Hosea Initiative, this is now national apostolate, national ministry. I've been, the last year and a half, probably been to 20 different states, and it's really neat because we're meeting people down on the county level who want to get involved, and they're doing amazing things to get the people educated. And this is what I said down at the Capitol steps today. Half of this battle, yes, is political, but the other half is education. If you've ever opened up and read Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Destroyed for lack of knowledge. Wait till you read this book. You're going to understand in the book that I wrote, if you get it, what happens when you love people with the truth. It'll blow your mind what happened right here in the state of Virginia. So what we want to do, as far as Hosea Initiative, what we do is we tell the story and we reveal the deception, okay? We explain the science. The science. Well, I've got a great medical team of volunteers. One of them is Dr. John Bruchowski. I can call him, or Dr. Angela Lanfranchi, and they'll help with this, when we have the workshops. Personalizing Mother Church. okay? I wish I had more time to get into all of these. Form courageous witnesses. We have written high school curriculum, and actually I want to give credit where credit's due. When Andrea Del Vecchio, who's on my team, when she read the book, she said, Terry, this has to get turned into curriculum. I said, well, that's great, but I don't know how to write curriculum. And she said, oh, I got my master's degree in curriculum development. I had no idea. So it now has the Nahil Opstat from the Diocese of Arlington, okay? And the book and the ministry has the endorsement of Archbishop Joseph Naumann from Kansas City Diocese, Kansas City, Kansas. He's the new USCCB Pro-Life Activities Director. So God's just downloaded all of this. So we have three main tools right now. We got the big book, the fact check booklet, which we literally measured a pair of Levi jean pocket, so it fit down in your pocket, okay? And we made it so nice that you won't want to throw it away or keep it in your purse or your backpack, so that you're equipped, you're ready. When somebody says, well, I'm not, I don't like abortion, but I think every woman deserves the right to choose. Guess what? Invest time with that person. Sit down with that person. Walk them through this booklet. I had a lady out in Montana. She had 40 grand nights with their wives, and they all literally read every single page in the fact check booklet. She said, Terry, they were either gasping or their jaws were on the floor of what that little booklet exposes. We want to take back our language, and I have a poster somewhere. We want to take back with child. With child. She is with child. Can everybody say that? With child? With child. I had forgotten this. I had actually forgotten it because I got so used to, pregnant. She's pregnant. I had forgotten that was a really crass description of a woman with child. She is with child. This was our banner at the March for Life. Let's say it together. She is with child. Let's start. Forget the word pregnant. Because, I just learned recently that was a really crass way of saying she's with child. Let's use God's words. Take back the language. They took it from us. Let's take it back. Poof. Okay. All right. So build unity within the church. Address the Catholic straddle. It's just lots of different things. What can you do as an individual? Share the truth. Get knowledgeable. This is my premise. If we're going to change this, yes, it's going to be partly some political victory or whatever to flip the law and all this. But that's not going to happen. We don't want civil war. What I believe is there's a huge swath in the middle, a huge swath of Catholics. I've already met so many all across the country. And they just say, Terry, I just didn't know. I just didn't know. We want to reach them. We want to love them with the truth. Love them with the truth. The first person after this I'm done. I'm going to take questions, but I want to tell you what happens. Before I met Dr. Bernard Nathanson, the movie came out, Maafa 21, which we have copies up here. They're only $2. Maafa is a Swahili word that means great tragedy. And it's a 2.5-hour documentary of the racist history of Planned Parenthood. You cannot watch this movie and walk away thinking, oh, they're not a racist organization. So I took the movie to a black minister. I write about him in chapter 1 in my book. He didn't know me. I didn't know him. I called him one day and I said, can I have a 3-hour appointment with you? He said, do you really need 3 hours? And I said, yeah. 2.5 hours to watch the movie and 30 minutes to talk. And when I walked up his steps, my prayer was, God, do not let me talk politics to this man. Because I didn't want him to think I was just there for politics or some vote or whatever. We watched that film, and I didn't know what else to say at the end of the film other than, Pastor, tell me what you think. And you know what he said? This is after investing 2.5 hours with him. Because I could have just given him the video, right? DVD. But I wanted to spend the time because he's worth it. All of us, people in the church are worth it. The babies are worth it. I wanted to love him with the truth. And he said, he pulled his chair up and he wagged his finger, and I thought, he hates all white people. That was literally my first thought. But he didn't say that. He said, I'll tell you what I think. I will never again vote for a pro-choice candidate for as long as I live. For if I do, I'm voting to annihilate my own race. And furthermore, abortion is just wrong. So I got on top of the table and I pulled out the pom-poms I had. And I'm like, woo! So that was the beginning. And then 6-7 months later, I'm at a prayer vigil saying, God, what am I supposed to do? And God said, go interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson. So I thank you. Let's go win.